So, can everybody hear me? Amazing. So, as Tim said, my name is Thorsten. I'm from the Vue.js core team. And I'm here to talk about, it's not clicked in, then we'll do it like this. I'm here to talk about bridging the gap. And by that I mean, how can we build cross-compatible components for Vue 2 and Vue 3 with confidence, despite the fact that they require a bit of different tooling, that they require a bit of different options, that they have breaking changes. So let's define the gap. I think it's pretty obvious, but let's just cover it. So I think the gap is probably best shown like this. Most of us, they start with Vue 2, and over there's Vue 3. We want to get there. And for applications, we already have a dedicated package from the Vue core team, which is at vue/compat, which is a package just explicitly meant to help you move a Vue 2 application to Vue 3. But for packages, it's different because you don't want to necessarily move right away. You want to support both versions at the same time without doing twice the work. And so you still have all of these issues, right? There's breaking changes, you have dependency conflicts, you don't know how to publish these two different versions, what's the best way to do that. You have issues with the unit tests, you have probably code duplication problems and so forth. And so what are the things that we have to do or that we want to achieve, basically? We want to write compatible code. We want to write code that respects the changes between both versions, but we still want to write one single file component and not two versions of it, because then we have to write two pieces of code, we have to write two pieces of tests and so forth. And tests is a good second point because we also write tests when we are good developers, and we want to have these tests be able to run against both Vue 2 and Vue 3 for our components that we want to publish in a package. And these also have breaking changes between the testing packages that we have for Vue 2 and Vue 3, so we also have to solve that problem. So as you already noticed, we have conflicting dependencies when we have a repository where we have code for Vue 2 and Vue 3 in it, and we just have to make it work in some way. And even if we manage that, there's still the question of how do I actually publish that? Do I just publish raw Vue files? Do I just build this thing one time? Can I just build it one time? Do I have to build it 2 times? If I have to build it 2 times, do I publish it in 2 packages or in one? What's the best strategy? So these are the topics that we want to kind of like talk about a bit. And also I want to just briefly introduce you to vue-Bridge, which is a side project of mine that I've been working on. It's not ready yet, but it's basically the playground that I use to experiment with all of these problems. So it consists of 4 little tooling blocks. One is a small runtime, which is like 600 bytes, and it's meant to polyfill the differences between Vue 2 and Vue 3 in the script block APIs where it's easily achievable without too much cost. But we also have unit tests where we have 2 different libraries responsible for unit tests for version 1 for Vue 2 and version 2 for Vue 3. And so we have a little bridge for these 2. So we have one package where you can use one API for mount and shallow mount, and it still works under the hood with the right version for the right Vue version you want to test against. We also have a small ESLint config, which for now basically is a preset, another preset for ESLint plugin Vue, just rearranging the rules in a way that it is warning you about things you cannot do in Vue 2 and cannot do in Vue 3 because you have to leave these things out. For example, in Vue 2 you can't have multiple root elements. So you shouldn't be using multiple root elements. There's no way to make that really work. And last but not least, it also has a small Vite plugin. I want to make it into an unplugin, which will then support Webpack and other bundlers, but for now it's a Vite plugin. And it just covers a few different aspects that I will get into later. And since this seems very complex, I aim on covering this with a lot of documentation and also project templates that you can just clone and start with. But again, this is still under heavy development. I am still working on this. I'm still figuring things out. So I would be happy if somebody were to join or test this, but it's not ready for public consumption yet in this regard. Also, as mentioned by Evan yesterday, Vue 2.7 is not too far away, and this release will also make work in Vue-Bridge easier because we don't have to rely on Vue.demi and Vue Composition API plugin under the hood just to get like a universal defined component method anymore. We can use the official Vue package for both Vue 2 and Vue 3, and so it's probably also worth waiting until Vue 2.7 drops until officially working with Vue-Bridge. So now we'll cover like the individual topics that I was briefly introducing earlier. So the first point is writing compatible code. We have on the left side the usual way on how to write a v-model props and events for Vue 2 and on the right for Vue 3. So these are a little bit different, right? Here we have a value prop and we emit an input event. On the right side we have a model value prop and we have to define the emit, and then we can emit update model value. So those are really not compatible with each other. Of course, there's quite an easy way to make that work. You can use this option from Vue 2 where you are allowed to redefine the default prop and event that is being used by the v-model on a component. But you have to remember that, you always have to type that. So I thought it would be easy, or it would be nice if you just could do this. So you just have like, you import define component, not from the Vue package, but from the runtime package, and then you can just write the component like you would for Vue 3. And when somebody uses your component package in a Vue 2 project, under the hood at runtime, it will just add this option for you and just make it work. So these are the little kinds of things that I want to collect in this runtime package that just make it easier to work, especially with Options API, which is still popular, when you write components that should be like have a universal interface so that they work with both versions of Vue. Unit testing, both versions, is also tricky, and here we for the first time see the conflict with dependencies because we have two versions of the test utils package. We have version 1, which is which is for tests against Vue 2, and we have test utils version 2, which is testing against Vue 3. But you need both of them in your project to actually run tests. And also they have subtle API differences between both versions, so how do you write a unit test that is working with both? Well, the answer here is similar to what we just saw with the runtime. We basically have these two different tests which look quite similar. The difference is that the props on the left are defined with the props option, and the provide mock that we have is nested in a global object, whereas for Vue 2 we have props data, and the provide option is on the first level of the options object. So also here we can quite simply, by now switching the import from test utils to Vue-Bridge testing, we can use the Vue 3 way of doing things. And under the hood, if this test is called against Vue 2, it will just reformat the options object to basically work with the older version of the test utils, which was aiming for Vue 2. And so this allows you to write your test once with the new API that is like the future API, the future safe API for your tests. But under the hood, you can still run them against Vue 2 to ensure compatibility with the older version. Then the next question is about build time optimizations, which is the Vite plugin. And here there are mainly, first of all, a small demo how to install it. It's really easy to import it, add it to the plugins array in your Vite config, and it works. So, and what it does is basically three quite different things actually. First, it supports version-specific style blocks because we have a few different syntax differences in the scope styles definitions for deeply nested selectors. And we also have a few differences in the styles for transitions. And this allows you to take care of that. We also support version-specific imports and a bit of alias trickery for easier source file sharing in a monorepo, which I will get to later. And so here's a quick demo. In this single file component, I have two style blocks, and you will notice that they have a v2 and a v3 tag on them. And this is so that the Vite plugin can recognize these blocks and just drop the one that is not for the current build target. So if your bundling your component library for Vue 2, it will drop the v3 block. And if you're bundling your component library for Vue 3, it will drop the v2 block. And so the fact that we have different syntax in there for the deep selector is not really important. Because otherwise, if we wouldn't do that, then the compiler for Vue 2 would complain about the code in the second style block, and the compiler for Vue 3 would complain about the code in the first style block, because they are different in these versions. Also, I am playing with a way of having version-specific imports. So this is basically an escape hatch. When you have version-specific code that you want to put in a dedicated file, you can do so by putting it in a .vue2 or .vue3 file, and then just import it as a file with a v-bridge query parameter, and then it will be translated during compilation to either .vue3.js or .js, or it will be compiled to or translated to .vue2.js. So this gives you one import statement in your unified code base, but under the hood, it resolves the two different source files depending on the build target that you're currently using. And so that is rather for edge cases, but maybe you have different third-party dependencies that you want to integrate depending on the Vue version, because also the third-party dependencies for Vue 2 and Vue 3 are different, maybe have slightly different APIs, and so you want to put them in a file and write a small wrapper around them. And so this is another one of these like edge cases. It's not something that you probably use every day, but it's nice that it's there, and it's good to basically ensure compatibility in not so common use cases. So, but the actual big point is probably this one. Because when you put all of the dependencies that you would need to build your component library for Vue 2 and Vue 3 in a single package JSON, you will notice that it's quite messy and quite complex, and not necessarily even able to work properly. Because first of all, you need both Vue versions, so you have to rename one of them with a package alias. But then you might have a package like Vue core, which works with both versions, but it looks at the version of the package called Vue to know which export to use, which export to give you, and that is always version 3, because version 2 is called Vue 2. So there's the first stumbling block that you will come across. Then you also have these different build time dependencies. The upper one is for Vue 3, the lower one is for Vue 2, and the lower one for Vue 2 depends on the Vue template compiler for Vue 2, which in turn expects the Vue package to be of version 2.6.14, but the Vue package is 3.2.32. So again, you have a problem with the dependencies. So long story short, this is really messy to get right, and the easiest part is defining the pure dependencies. But apart from that, it's really not recommended to like put it all in one package JSON. So the better solution, if you are brave enough to dabble into it, and I can really recommend it because it's just a great experience once you get the hang of it, is Workspaces or a monorepo. Workspaces give you the possibility to have multiple nested packages in one repository. And by the way, I use pnpm, which I can not recommend enough for this kind of thing, because it just gives you a lot of amazing commands and configuration options to make this working with a monorepo, with a Workspaces-based project very easy. And so the setup is basically you have your root file package JSON, which defines maybe your test stuff, ESLint dependencies and stuff like that go in there. You define your workspaces, and you could maybe have a file there where you have shared read configuration, because then the actual packages that you want to build, write, publish, test, and so forth are the Vue 3 subfolder, which has its own package JSON, its own read config, and the actual source files that you're writing, including the tests, which I left out for brevity here. And then you have a Vue 2 folder, which also has its own package JSON, its own read config, and not really a source folder, but a symlink back to the source folder in the Vue 3 folder. So we are recycling basically the same source files because we wrote them in a way that they can be built for both versions. And so in the root package JSON, as I said, you have only the project dependencies like ESLint or turbo repo or whatever you want to use. And the actual package dependencies are in there. So for the Vue2 package, for example, we can have a dedicated package name, Vue2 my package, and all of the dev dependencies are just Vue2 related. There's no way that we can have big problems here with conflicts unless, especially when you use PNPM. Yarn, at least Yarn Classic, which I used to use, also has workspaces, and NPM has too, but they hoist a lot of stuff in the root node modules, which then again can lead to conflicts. But PNPM resolves all of this beautifully because it is very strict with what is accessible in the root node modules folder. And you have one clear pure dependency on Vue 2.6 because this is a Vue 2 package and not a mixture of both. And likewise, in the Vue 3 package, you have its own name, Vue 3 my package, and you have only the Vue 3 dependencies. But at the same time, both of these packages can have runtime dependencies, for example, Lodash or Vue use core. Now, of course, you realize you have to have two package JSONs that you have to keep in sync when it comes to adding or removing dependencies. But I think that is something that you can solve with a little bit of like a clever script line in the package JSON in the root folder, for example. And in the end, it's really worth it that you have a clean separation here. And don't worry, well, I will go into a small demo of this in a minute, but I'm just covering the basics so you get the basic layout. And so the last point here is basically building and publishing. And I won't really show you an example of how to publish plain simplified components because while that's technically possible, it has limitations because you still have to have one compile step if you want to use TypeScript in it. Also, you can't use the build time optimizations that I talked about because there is no build step if you just publish raw single file components. And so the recommendation is really to build your package 2 times. Just have a script in the main package JSON that runs the scripts for both workspaces. But there's still 2 variants that we can discuss. The first one is that we have actually 2 differently named packages, which is kind of like what I showed earlier in the slide before. So the import for Vue2 for a project that is consuming my package is different depending on whether the application is using Vue2 or Vue 3. You have just to have to install a different dependency, but the API that you use is the same. And so for us as the author of this library, of this package, we have the lib3 folder, which has a dist folder, and we have a lib2 folder, which has a dist folder, and we run npm publish for these both versions. This means we have dedicated bundles. These dedicated bundles are published in separate packages to npm. We have a clean separation of dependencies. We don't have any mixture of Vue2 and Vue 3 in the package JSONs. It's also pretty straightforward to generate types because you can run Vue TSC separately in both of those folders. And each of these folders has a very simple package JSON setup because you only have one entry file. Of course, this is abbreviated, but you just have to refer to one index.js in the dist folder, and you don't have to actually manage different entry points depending on the version. But this is something that you could actually also do. You could also say, I want to publish one package. You still have this workspace setup where you have 2 different folders to separate the dependencies, but you could very easily say that you have, as the output of the build, you have 2 dist folders in one package. So both the workspaces build their files, but they both output them into dist folders in the Vue 3 package. And so you just publish one package with 2 entry points, one for Vue 2 and one for Vue 3. The recommendation obviously would be to make the default entry point the Vue 3 version because that is the future version that we all are moving to if we are not already on it. But you could have like Vue my package / Vue 2 as an entry point for people who are coming or are using it in a Vue 2 project. Now, this is also working quite nicely. It has a few little drawbacks. It could maybe be a bit trickier or easier to get conflicts in pure dependencies, because now you have pure dependencies for Vue 2 and Vue 3, or sorry, pure dependency on Vue 2 or Vue 3 when you publish the package, but the dev tooling and stuff is still neatly separated. But we also have to build types 2 times now, and I think TypeScript doesn't really support different type entry points in these exports configuration until maybe now with 4.7, but before that it wasn't really possible. So it can be tricky to get it right with types, type declarations. Okay, so now boring slides are over. I have one template so far, which is including TypeScript, and it is up on NPM. And I want to switch to the editor now. So like this. Let's make it a bit bigger. Yeah, that's big enough, I think. So this is just a live version of what we just talked about, right? So we have a root package JSON in the root folder, which basically just has our really boring development dependencies, GSDOM, TSLib, TypeScript, vtest, vuetsc, ESLint stuff, and we have all of these scripts. And now these scripts are using pnpm clever filter syntax, which basically allows us to run the build scripts in the nested 2 workspace packages from the root quite easily. And so we have these 2 packages, libvue3 and libvue2, which basically look very similar. And also they are much more complete now because I included all of the different entry points that you should be including if you properly use this incredibly confusing exports field, which I'm not the only one who finds it incredibly confusing, right? But it is there, so we got to take care of that. And now we have like a Vue 2 package and a Vue 3 package. And the neat thing is, if you look into the folders, we have the Vue 3 folder. Sorry, I will close that for now. And the Vue 3 folder has a source folder, which has a test and an input file, which we have here. And this input, this is just a demo file, of course. It's just an input with a v-model, and it just uses what we just talked about earlier. Use the runtime package instead of the normal Vue package to get the define import. You can write your component like you're used to for Vue 3, but we can build this for Vue 2 and Vue 3 because this same source file is used in the Vue 2 package via a symlink. So this is the same folder, actually. If I go into this folder and go into components and open this component, it's the same component. It will open in a second tab, but it's the same file. And to actually not get problems with the symlinks, this is the job of the alias trickery that I earlier alluded to in the v plugin. So the test is similar. I have one test file, which uses vue-bridge testing to get the mount function instead of the normal Vue test utils. And then we can just write a test, mount the input component that we just had, pass props to it, write our assertions, and this just works. So what I also included in this template is for each of these versions can run a little application. It has 2 different entry points here just because like installation of plugins is a little bit differently in a consuming application. But again, this app folder is just a symlink here in the libvue2 folder. What we can do now is when we run pnpm def Vue 3, we get on this tab, we get this little input that we can use to like, and if we look into the dev tools, I'm sorry, it's probably a little bit small. It's Vue 3.33, and it's telling me I should upgrade to 0.36. Now we can do the same thing here. Again, we're still in the root, pnpm dev Vue 2. Now we get a second link on port 3001. This is the same application, apparently. But if we look here into the dev tools, This is running on 2.6.1.14. And so you can have one source folder where you write your components, write your tests, with the help of a few helpers from vue-Bridge. You can also write your little demo application with only one set of source files, and then you can run a dev server for each version of Vue, test it in both visually, manually, however you want, and you can write and you can run your unit tests. So if we close this, or if we open another tab here, we can have pnpm, test all, which is a script in the root package JSON, and it will just run vtest on both versions, and they both pass. And we can run build all, and it will build the packages and also create the types. So this is like the Vue 3 version in the build output. I didn't minify it, just so you can see. This is using the block syntax in the render function that is Vue 3. And here we have Vue 2 in the dist folder. And this is using has converted it into a Vue 2 render function. So everything works here, and we could just now publish these two packages to npm. And then we have like a super, a well-tested Vue component package on npm in 2 versions, working with Vue 2 and Vue 3. And we have only written the source file ones, only written the tests ones. And the only thing that we really have to duplicate is like the work that we put into the package JSON files to keep like the dependencies in sync. That's the extra work that you have to do once you have the setup running. Okay, so we have to get back to the talk. So I also have a little bit of documentation up. The goal here is to actually, of course, get you started, so you can read about the template that I just showed you and install it. And I'm still working on, so all of this is under, still being written partially, so not all of the pages even have content. As I said, it's under heavy development, but the goal is basically to use the how-to guide section to rewrite the migration guide, not from the perspective of moving from Vue 2 to Vue 3, but more from the perspective of I want to use feature X, but I know there's a difference between Vue 2 and Vue 3. How can I make it work with both versions, or is there nothing I can do and I have to use something else? So these are guides for how to resolve the reactivity caveats. They're in Vue 2, but not in Vue 3. So you need a set and delete function. There's guides for how to deal with v-model and components, what we just showed you, how to deal with lifecycle hooks that have different names. We also have support for writing custom directives, which also have a little bit different APIs, so you can use all of the same hooks, but the most important ones are the same, but they have slightly different names. And so we also have a define directive wrapper here that basically does the same thing as the define component function. It basically does a little bit of renaming of stuff, so it works in both versions. Yeah, so we also have like the package documentation, but everything is really raw still, not complete, but it's still ongoing. It's a side project that I've been working on for months, but I don't really find enough time to really sit down with it for large blocks to really get moving. So this is the documentation. So I would be happy to collaborate with someone who is interested in moving this forward, maybe also contribute a different template, because not everybody is interested in something that's built with TypeScript. Maybe somebody finds a better way to still use a flat architecture in a repository instead of a mono repo. I would also be happy to have pull requests for documentation. Somebody who's cleverer than me to write ESLint rules from scratch to support stuff that are not coming from the base ESLint plugin view package so far. So yeah, I would be happy to collaborate. So you can find me on Twitter, of course. You can find the documentation online. You can find the repository online. You can find the template online. And you also open a Twitter account. I hope to post there in the future. But disclaimer, after the conference, I'm gone on vacation for 2 weeks, so don't expect too much content then. But yeah, this is the end. I hope I'm not too early. There's still 5 minutes left, but this is all I got so far. So you made it to the end, we're done. Just a quick shout out, this presentation was done with SlideF, which is an amazing framework built by Anthony Fu, and it's allowing you to build component slides with Vue 3 and Vite, and it's absolutely incredible. I will never use Keynote again, simply because I can now have everything in the Git repository, use branches, use Markdown. It's amazing. So yeah, thank you for listening to me rambling about components, and I hope it's useful to you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thorsten.